Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to be doing Rosettes II, a little bit more advanced variations on some rosettes. So earlier on in the Wandering Bull video series, we talked about the very basic mechanics of making rosettes. And so if you need some of the details as far as how to tie knots or how to begin your project, certainly you'd like to start there. And after you've kind of mastered some of the basic skills of rosettes and all, then we'd like you to come and sit in on this, where we're just going to talk about some variations that will enhance your rosettes. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is a piece like this, where it's just a very basic rosette as far as its manufacture goes, but you'll see that by kind of changing some of the orientations and all, it can really give it an entirely different look. So that's our goal for today. So as you notice on this one here, we've started out with a very basic rosette in the center and then added on some different additions or embellishments, and that's what we're going to focus on. So our project today, and I've started a little piece already, is going to be this one here, where we've got a basic rosette in the center, and then the edges, I'm going to add some of these half rounds, just to show you how to build that out. So ultimately this is going to become a pendant where the necklace part is going to come off these two top pieces, and we're going to have three different half moons down here, where at the end there'll be some fringes and things like that hanging off. But to show you how to put these pieces on, I've used the same orientation as before of this fancy folded paper, which put on the stiff felt helps me to orient. So I marked the lines, and so if you look behind, you'll see my orientation lines, and all of those designs hopefully will line up right on that. And then I'm also using those lines to dictate where these half circles are going to go. And that will, again, just give it a balanced look. So we're going to start in the centerpiece on the bottom. And as you see, we start with one bead in the very center, and then we've stitched on 5 of those yellow beads for that second row. Same technique as the rosettes before. Again, don't count your beads. You want to fill the space that you need. So then I'm going to put on the dark row here. So I brought my thread up from back, and I've brought it up into the place I want. I'm going to continue with no more than 3 beads at a time. So I'm going to slide my 3 beads down, fit those into place, and then stitch them the same as we did on the rosette before. So I've got 3 beads down. I'm going to come back up between beads 1 and 2, and then go through beads 2 and 3. So it's the same stitch as we did before, but we're just going to create that other ring around there. And just real quickly, the problem comes if you, especially in these really tight circles, if you add more than 3 beads at a time, you lose control, and that's when your work becomes very lumpy, and you lose a lot of control. So do no more than 3 beads at a time. And the other thing you'll notice on this, the design, the lines that I drew are the same ones that I used for the main part of the rosette. I'm also incorporating them in all of these little additions to the work. And the other thing you might notice, and I find it very helpful, some folks, if they're doing a shaped piece of beadwork, something like this, for instance, or the balloons or something like that, what they'll do is take this stiff felt, draw out their pattern, and then cut it out immediately and then bead up to it. But you'll notice I'm giving myself a fair amount of background material, because the beads don't always take the same dimensions as your designs. And the other thing that happens is sometimes I just change my mind in midstream And if I had already cut that fabric to size, then I couldn't change that pattern as I had wished. So we'll hurry through that. And so now I'm ready to come up and start the second row, and I'm going to go back the other way, again continuing with 3 beads at a time, and stitch them down in place. This time going back the other way. And I'll also remind you to keep adding wax to your thread, because as soon as you have a sensation that that thread is not going to cooperate, sometimes it breaks. So what I like to do is tie a knot in the back, and I do that by tying a simple overhand knot and pulling that, and it snugs right down to the fabric. So I've got a nice flush knot right at the fabric. Sometimes I'll do 2 of them just so that that knot is big enough so that it doesn't pull back through the fabric. So again, an overhand knot, put your finger on that and just pull it off, and so that secures that old piece of thread. Now, this piece here is enough to keep me going, so I'm going to keep using that. So here's another chance where we can show you how to add new thread. So if I had just threaded this needle, I would then the next step use the wax, coat my thread with wax, and then what I like to do to start adding a new thread is just tie a knot in the end, and big enough so that it won't pull through the fabric is really our only goal. So that is the knot that I'm going to use, and because I've already secured the original thread, I'm just going to come up where I wanted to start. So I've added my new thread with a knot. So as you can see, I've got a knot there all ready to go. I'm going to pull that knot right up to the fabric, and now I'm right back to ready to go. So if I'm adding a new thread at any stage of the game, that's how I will add that, and I'm ready to go and just continue that pattern. So again, I'm going back the other way. I'm going through 2 beads and going to pull that needle through like that, and then add again my 3 more beads and continue this design. And part of the advantage of this video is you already know the basic mechanics of how to make a rosette, and some of you kind of want to understand a little bit more what's involved in being a little bit more creative and designing things that aren't just plain round circles. And some of those things are just plain tricks that you learn with experience, not always things that you can find in a book or something like that. But I've learned a lot from trial and error. And keep in mind that you can cull your beads for big or small depending on the space that you need to fit in. We're using size 10 Czechoslovakian seed beads from the Wandering Bull. So I've placed the last 3 beads there. I've already pre-estimated the space that it would take. I'm going to pull them into place like that, and then just tack those down so they don't leave or move. So that completes that one loop. One thing I'll mention, and this is just some of the tips from experience, as I said, the necklace is going to hang this way from these 2 suspensions, and I'm going to have 3 different loops at the bottom. I did the middle one first because I'm never sure, beadworkers will never be sure, how much space you'll have between the middle one and these edges. So by starting on the middle one, then if you need to adjust something for the edges, you can make those match each other so that your design kind of changes as you go. So that's just one of my tricks. And then the next thing I'm going to do is work on another loop based on these same lines that come down here on the sides. So the same as we did before. In the original rosette video, I talked a little bit about coming up half a bead away. So if I came up on these lines exactly with my needle, that bead is not going to sit on the line, it's going to sit off one side. So when I come up off the line, it will allow me to get the red bead to sit squarely on that line. So I've come off one side, and then I'm going to pull this bead right into place so it sits nice and squarely on the line. Like that. So that's kind of the important thing. And then when I come over to the other line, I'm going to see exactly where I can put it to make that distance the same. So then I'm going to come back up from the back, again, that magic half a bead away, like that, and pull that through, and I'm ready to start the row of yellow. Now, if you remember from the original rosette video, I talked about that first bead sits independently, and then the next row is the only row that you put all those beads on at one time. So it's the same here, but I don't have beads going all the way around. I'm going to just put enough beads to loop around that red center bead, and in this case, it looks like it's going to be 5. So again, I wanted you to see that it's essentially the same technique as before with just some modifications. So I've put my 5 beads down to the end of the thread, and I'm just going to fit them around that red bead and eyeball it to make sure that it does fit nice and snugly. And it does. So what I'm going to do now is stitch that down so that the yellow beads are secured at each end, and you'll notice the yellow beads are still a little bit floppy. So like the original beading rosettes, I'm going to come back between every one of the yellow beads and just couch or stitch over that the thread holding the yellow beads. And I'll kind of preen it or force them into the positions I want. There. And so we're doing just half circles here, but keep in mind, if you're making a barrette or something like that, you can use this technique and just change the shape of these loops, or make the loops at any one of the different points to totally change that design. After finishing that, I'm going to just come back, and now I'm doing regular rosette, so I'm doing 3 beads at a time. I'm going to switch back to the dark blue, and I'm going to continue the same as I did before. Make sure that those blue go right up to the original main part of the rosette. Stitch them into place. Go back around. So we talked a little bit about the fact that when your thread breaks or when you need to add thread, the key is you can secure all of those knots in behind on your rosette, because when we're done, we're going to cut a separate piece of felt and actually make our pattern for the backing. So all of this back will be hidden. So what I'm going to do is just finish this one loop and then show you one little addition. A lot of times I start with an idea on a rosette and I'll work on it a little bit, and then either out of necessity or creativity, I'll see a different idea that I can change that pattern a little bit. And it's amazing how if you just add one color or do something uniquely, it changes the whole feel for the rosette. So I'm almost done. So this time, you'll see I've just got one little spot left there. So I'm going to eyeball and see if I need one big blue bead or two small to fill that space. And my bet is I'm going to need just one big blue. I find it's always better to use too few beads than too many, because too many always makes it buckle or bunch somewhere along the way. So that one addition of the blue bead really kind of fills that space perfectly. So I'm just going to stitch that down. So I've almost completed it. And notice I didn't have to measure the distance between this loop and this loop. I'm going to work off of those lines that I had for the original rosette. And I just think it kind of makes it attractive, and then we can build on it from there. So I'm going to hurry along, finish this turquoise background, and then show you one idea I just had. I find that just the changing color sometimes will really enhance it. And the other thing in reality, sometimes I want to add more color or more design just to make it a certain size. So if this is going to be a pendant and my original pattern is a little bit smaller than I expected, then sometimes I need to be creative and think of ways that I can make it a little bit bigger and still have a pleasing design. So we're almost there. And we're using, as I say, size 10-0 seed beads and the Nymo thread from Wandering Bull. And I like to use size 10 seed beads and Nymo thread, usually size B or D. There's not a whole lot of strain. It's not like we're making moccasins, so there's really a lot of strength required in this thread. So we have a little bit of flexibility. But I think you don't need a whole lot of thread. I double the thread, mostly because then it doesn't necessarily pull off the needle as often. So again, I'm at the point of deciding I've about finished this strip, so I've got to complete that turquoise row. I think 2 beads will work. So I've eyeballed that space, and it looks like those 2 skinny blue beads or turquoise beads are going to fit. So I'm going to pull those into place. And to me, that looks pretty uniform. I'm happy with that result. So when this is done, I'm going to have another loop over here, and again, the 3 loops on the bottom. But as a way just to, again, change the design in our minds, I'm thinking what I might do is add an additional red background row on the outside. And so I'm just going to show you how that will change the whole pattern. We won't complete the rosette today, but you certainly get the idea of what's involved here. So just again, to kind of, I think, spice it up, I'm going to come up from the back, that half a bead away, and I'm going to pull my thread through. And still, I'm using 3 beads at a time. That's the magic number, no matter how big your rosette gets. I'm going to space them. One of the advantages I feel I have on beadwork is I'm pretty good at visualizing or eyeballing that space that's required. And once you get that habit, then you can kind of speed along a little bit more rather than fit each row into place. But so I'm going to try a row of red on the background. So it's that same technique of putting 3 beads down and then coming back through 2. So nothing has changed other than maybe our direction. And I'll just show you, I'll do an inch here, and you'll see how those 3 beads, that row of red, I think, really will enhance that pattern. And the nice thing with being creative on rosettes, you don't have to make all these decisions at the beginning. Start with a simple pattern, and then as it goes along, feel free. A lot of times a pattern will kind of introduce itself to your work, and feel free to make those changes out on the fly. So again, I've almost finished this row here, and I see it looks like space for one more red bead. So I'm going to just tuck that into place, the same as I've done before with our spacing. So I'm going to finish this third tab down here, and then I'm going to complete a red border all in between the half moon design, so it'll have a red border around it. Then I'll trim off the background and match that on my template to put the edging on, just like we did in rosette number 1. So it's just, again, one idea. And while I had you, I just had a couple of other variations I thought I'd share with you. This is a slightly different example, again, to show you how all of these things come off that same paper folded piece with the 8 designs. What I did in this case, you'll notice this is a bit of an off-centered rosette, and it kind of expands, and I think it has a really pleasing effect. So the template actually folds on down like that, and then I mark the same lines at the folds and connect them with a straight edge. So I've got a straight edge going out 8 different directions. Now, as I told you in Rosette 1, don't put a border on there. This is an exception, really, where what I want to do is have this kind of offset rosette go right out to these borders. So this is one of the few times when I would actually put the border, because that will dictate where my rosettes go. And then it's really important when I'm doing this to not force this border out of position as we go. So I've completed the rosette just the same as I had before. You'll notice I was kind of creative on the design, so I've got the diamond patterns being elongated on the top, on the center, and there are lots of different variations that I can do with this pattern as it goes out. I thought I'd show you a little bit of how this manifests. So again, 3 beads at a time, and I'm going to stitch them in place and then go back through 2. I want to get to the pattern part to show you how that goes. So sometimes we have to make concessions and change things in midstream. So in this case, I put too many beads on. I think I need only 3 blue. So obviously right now it's easy enough to pull one off. Get to my dark blue pattern. And then I'm going to stitch that into place. Like that. Continuing the pattern along. I'll just do this one pattern and just show you. And so from here, once you know the mechanics of it, you can really be as creative as you want. So again, working on that line principle, I'm not focusing on how many turquoise beads are on the background. What I'm doing is making sure that in this case, that red bead sits right exactly on the line as close as I can. And if my counts are accurate on either side of it, my design will come out perfectly. So, or it'll come out pretty darn good. And in this case, the red bead stayed right on the line, which is where I wanted it. Like that. So that is the goal there. So then I thought I would take a minute and just show you a couple of other basic variations that I think embellish a rosette, or some tricks to the trade, really. So this is just an example of a challenge that we all face, whether we're doing beadwork or leather work, where you've got a thread here and it's in the way and it's not long enough for you to thread it and tie it, bring it down. You may not even have enough room to tie a knot in it to secure that. So one of the tricks that I have done in the past, as I think I said in the last video, if there's an easy way or a lazy way to do something, I have probably figured it out. It's kind of an idea of a needle threader. So I've got this thread that I want to pull in the back so I can secure that. I'm going to use my regular beading needle. So this is the same needle that I've been using, and it's got a thread. And what I'm going to do is carefully push the back end, this end, through the fabric so that it actually forms a bit of a needle threader. So I'm going to push it up where I want it to come. See if I can show you this here. Bear with me a second. So this is the thread that I want to get rid of. And I've forced this needle and thread backwards up through the fabric. So I've got a bit of a loop here between the thread and the needle. This thread that's in the way, I'm going to stick into underneath the needle and thread. So basically what that does is act as that needle threader. So then when I pull the needle and thread from the back, I can pull that rogue thread right out of the way so that it really cleans it up nice, and it's a nice thing to do if you're doing leather work or something like that as well. So that's just one trick that I find comes in handy quite a bit. Another idea I just wanted to share with you is things like, sometimes if you're finishing a rosette, sometimes you want to embellish it with, in this case, leather fringe that might be appropriate on the end of this wampum belt, or say you beaded a horse rosette and you wanted to have a tail of a horse just added to it. I used to spend a lot of time trying to thread that leather through the main fabric, and it's really a tedious process. What I've done recently is, and again, I'm using, this is a piece of genuine brain tanned leather, and the advantage with the brain tanned leather, it's really pliable. So I guess it would depend on what the final look of your project is, but the brain tan leather that Wandering Bull carries is really nice, not only to sew onto, but it also has a lot of, it's very pliable. So if you wanted, for instance, to sew fringe on, I've found that what you can do is take a piece, I'll usually fold it in half, because then you get twice the volume, twice the fun. And say I wanted to put that coming out of the middle of this rosette, I would just come up from the, so I'd finish my beaded rosette, and all of these additions I usually put on at the end, because as you're beading a rosette, the more things that are hanging off the front of a rosette just get tangled up in the thread and all. So I try and do all of these additions like the fringe and things like that at the very end, just because they don't get tangled up as quickly that way. So I would come up from the back wherever I want to have my fringe. There goes my pattern. And come up from the back. And then I would fold the fringe in half and just catch the top. I would go sideways through, I'll show you here in a minute, hopefully. Sideways like that. So I've got two pieces, and I'm going to slide that leather right down to the end. Obviously in this rosette I wouldn't necessarily have this attachment, but So I've secured that to the rosette in whatever place I want, and then just stitched down to secure it. And because it's brain tan leather and it really just kind of molds to the beadwork around it, stitch right in close and you don't even see the thread. And then you can add some nice leather fringe like that. If you were doing the strings on the balloon, something like that, be the same idea where you just come up from the back after you've finished the whole rosette, after the project, and put all these little embellishments on afterwards, and you can sneak those through. And then when you put the backing on, of course, then you don't see all of the detail or the knots and the messy part behind there. So those are just a few examples, and this is another example of something maybe we'll talk about in the future, where this sort of piece actually includes a variety of different techniques all incorporated into one. We've got round peyote stitch around the top here, and then this is actually flat peyote stitch that kind of meanders down around the feather, which is one bead at a time. And then we've built that up over an applique feather so that it all kind of comes together. And sometimes it's really fun to be able to incorporate some of these different techniques all at once. So that's the highlights today. I encourage you to be creative, try new things, add some different metal spots or something like that. And then as this develops, each time you're going to get ideas for future projects. So thank you very much and happy beading.